The subject of my next column at American Songwriter will be something I call power tones. Power tones in the music theory world are called non-chord tones. I'm calling them power tones because in Measure for Measure, the column, I emphasize the meaningful content of music, whereas a term like non-chord tones, when I hear a term like that, my brain automatically begins to switch off or move into a mathematical mode, a chemistry mode. I'm much more interested in the emotional effects of musical tones. So I'm renaming non-chord tones power tones, but don't use that term in your music theory quizzes. It's only good for this column. So first of all, we need to know what a chord tone is before we can understand a non-chord tone. And after we do that, then we can get to the power of non-chord tones to communicate. Chord tones are extracted from the musical alphabet. The musical alphabet has 7 letters. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it just starts over again, A, B, C, and so on. In fact, there's a G before this A. It is a continuous stream of letter names. Now, this A and this A sound so much alike that they're given the same name. But this A would be higher than this A, and the distance between the two of them would be called an octave. Because if you notice, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tones. 8, octave, octopus, and so forth. 8. Okay, now if this looks familiar at all, well, just watch. That's right, the alphabet corresponds to the white keys on the piano. There are also some black keys that fill in the gaps between notes such as A and B. Right here, between them, there's a black key, and that black key could be named B flat or A sharp. We're not talking about that subject right now, so just file it away if you're not already aware of it. Okay, so we have this alphabet, and now the question about chord tones comes up. Every other letter on the alphabet belongs to a chord. So if I start with D and skip a letter and go to F and skip a letter and go to A, then I have a basic chord which is called a triad. A triad has 3 notes. D, F, A spells a chord known as D minor. Here's D, F, and A. D, F, and A. Okay. Now you can perform this little trick with any of the alphabetical letters. So for example, G, B, and D is also a chord. And I should say it is a triad. B, D, and F forms another triad, and they don't all sound the same. But you can get them to sound, say, alike. You can get them all to sound like minor chords, major chords, or augmented chords or diminished chords by slightly changing the intervals between them. That's a subject for another video. So skipping ahead now to the subject of power tones, I think it would be worthwhile first to hear melodies that are composed entirely of chord tones. And then the relationship between power tones and chord tones becomes much more clear. When you hear what you can do with chord tones, both the strength and the limitations of it, and then you hear what you can do by messing around with power tones, the non-chord tones. So I'm going to play a few melodies that use only chord tones, and you'd be surprised at how famous some of these melodies are. First chord tone melody is one that's really familiar to Americans. And now we come to the first type of non-chord tone. It's called a passing tone. So we have 2 chord tones, and we have a tone in between them. And that's going right down the alphabet, E, D, C. E, D, C. Then we go to another chord tone. And now an alien tone, a non-chord tone in terms of the key that we're in. And you can see that it's very striking and dramatic. Whereas the first non-chord tone was just a kind of a connector, kind of like slurring your words. Okay, now here's another all chord tone melody. I'm sure this one is familiar to everybody. Okay, not all chord tone melody has to sound military or like a national anthem. So now I'll dip into the rock song, pop song, Beatles song list and play a few measures from a few popular songs. Bebop a Lula by Tex Davis and Gene Vincent. Now, Bebop-a-Lula uses another type of chord called a dominant seventh chord, and all the notes that I played in the melody belong to a C7 chord. Here is a C7 chord, played as a chord with all the notes sounding together. But if you spread the notes out over time, you get what's called an arpeggio. And that's what it sounds like when you spread the notes out over time. The next song will be Because by John Lennon. The last note came from a different chord, but the first group of notes were all from the chord C sharp minor. The last tone in Because sets up the problem with composing melody entirely out of chord tones. Pretty soon the mind collapses all the notes from a horizontal line into a vertical structure, the structure of a chord, and it's impossible to feel any sense of surprise at the next note in the melody unless you change chords and get a different tone introduced, or you use non-chord tones. And now I want to talk about non-chord tones, what they are and what effect they have.